they just said that you need to come to an understanding within yourself that you have to interact with the cartel. You have to make them aware of exactly what you want to do. It's almost like pitching a studio.
Talk about the timeliness. Like, how does it feel, given that, when you started making this, when you wrapped it, to have this out at this moment in time in America?
I'm back to this feeling of when we were filming. I thought that we were capturing the conclusion of something, not the beginning of something, right? And so I often feel quite a bit of anger when I watch it, knowing that, we all clap when, Maria gets her asylum and when these great moments happen in these people's lives. But now that we're in a situation where there is this militarized deportation force, groups of people who will wait in plain clothes outside the very courthouses where people go to pursue their asylum legally, but based on the system doing it right. I feel a lot of anger. I feel a lot of happiness that nothing has happened to Maria and to some of these folks. Part of the tragedy of it is that I have to tell her I don't recommend that she goes to screenings. I don't, I've distanced myself from the family itself because I worry that these plainclothes agents will be there. It's a vulnerable moment. So I feel immense pride, but also anger and this sense of we just don't know where this is going to go.
To that, like, how is she doing? The last time you heard from her, and did she get to see? Has she seen?
Well, so this is one of these moments of wild joy that we did have. So we won the audience award at Brooklyn Film Festival, which is this great local festival. But I really explicitly told her, I'm worried about you. You're vulnerable. You have asylum, but ICE doesn't care. ICE doesn't care what law is, what isn't. They're essentially becoming a private army. So with that in mind, I was very explicitly like, you should really think about coming. So the film starts and we didn't see her, and I was like, all right, we're okay, she's not gonna be here. And then about halfway through, she joined us with Axel, Alex, and her new daughter. And we're now, when you make a film like this, the closeness that you ultimately feel with your participants is huge. So we are close friends and we communicate. But I had no idea that she was gonna be there. So, the credits roll, people are clapping, and she stood up and everybody started sobbing, and it became this incredible sort of communal moment. So what I can say is that she's doing great. Axel is graduating high school. Alex is joining the United States Air Force. He's going to be a pilot. And she has a lovely new daughter, so she's doing great.
I love that. Okay, let's go back because, talk about where this actually began for you and what actually inspired the documentary itself.
Sure. So, I have refugee stories sort of in my blood. My grandfather was a Spanish secular merchant and citizen of Spain in a place called Melilla in northern Africa. It's a protectorate of Spain. So he's a Spanish Arab person, really fascinating guy. When the Civil War happened and the Franco regime began their war north because he was a general of the African armies, of the Spanish colonial empire, my family were exiled to Tangier. So they fled as refugees with nothing to Tangier, and they started their lives over there. And then from there, they went to Venezuela and then eventually back to Spain. So, these stories are in my blood. Immigration is a part of who I am. So that was one genesis point. Another was we were editing our last film. This is a film about teenage Ukrainian refugees. It was for Paramount. And so we were editing in this bay in Midtown, and at that time, it was the peak moments of the crisis. So we'd leave the bay at around 5 p.m. and we would just be confronted by these waves of people, these just walls of people who had just gotten deposited off these buses. So just the proximity initially was the way in of just seeing people and seeing that the absence of any sort of representatives from the city, and just seeing these volunteers. So that was very much the initial kind of way in.
Yeah. Following up on that, like, what is your way in? Like, how did you find Maria and start telling, her story?
It's actually all fairly fidelic to what you see in the film. So I was with Adama I had no expectation of any of what you all saw. I was with her shooting when she got that phone call from Mohammed. So she gets that phone call. I drive with her in real time, covering every step of it, to Evie Loves. There I meet Sasha and Mohammed. They introduce me to Father Mike. Mike introduces me to Maria, and then we became just quick collaborators. She was, immensely brave, courageous, and she was still very recently traumatized by the jungle, so she was very much in that zone. But she took a chance and just, I think she was starting to witness how appropriated and how out of control migrants' narratives are. And so she sensed that this was an opportunity to sort of take the microphone and have agency over her story. So she started working with us, and that was the way in.
Yeah. How are you building her trust? And at that time, when you're sitting down with her?
In some ways, my bad Spanish. So I'm relatively fluent, but there is, I have wild grammatical issues. I have wild vocabulary issues. And so we'll have these conversations where I can see her sort of like twisting her head and decoding what I'm saying. And I think that weirdly that was helpful because she detected that there was a vulnerability on my end. So it was like, this Spanish gringo kid is going to speak to me with a camera pointed at me, but he's also sort of consciously showing kind of who he is in how he speaks. And so it became this sort of trust exercise. Like, I will sit with you in good faith and have a conversation. Will you do the same with me? And that quickly kind of got us into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And let's talk about Jonathan.
Yes.
That aspect of that.
Oh, Jonathan.
Because I was telling you outside earlier, it was fascinating watching that aspect of the story, because you're not making him a villain. Like, talk about finding him and how you wanted to, what you learned about him as you're telling his story or following his journey.
Yeah. What comes to mind are the perceptions that immediately were challenged when I went to that part of the world. So we have a very American sense of binary when it comes to things like this. Legal, illegal, legitimate, illegitimate, morally acceptable, contemptible, whatever. As soon as I went down to Cucuta, I had this conversation with our regional producer, and he said, I asked, all right, what are the gang dynamics? What do I need to worry about in terms of abductions and things like that? And he said, don't worry about any of that stuff, because all of the people that you would be worried about are all the same people. There are no gang beefs. There are no, FARC are a paramilitary group that were politically active during the Civil War. They moonlight as security for the cops, who moonlight as security for the Gulf Cartel, who hires Tren de Aragua. All of these people are one and the same. The cops, immigration, gangs, paramilitary, they're all the same people. And they're all super reliant on the value of this industry. So, it's neck to neck with the drug trade. It's an immensely profitable endeavor, and the outcome of that profit is, in many ways, infrastructure. And so this is to your question about Jonathan. I went in there and I had that very American perception completely, immediately challenged. And so you meet Jonathan. Jonathan sort of sees himself, as you can tell, as sort of a, kind of a gangster Robin Hood. He obviously exploits these people. He pays a rent. He has family that he needs to feed, and that's how he justifies it to himself. But I think broadly you can open up the aperture on that, and while yes, we need to condemn and be critical of things like, international drug organizations, a cartel, things like this, at the same time, in a place where politics has collapsed and economics have collapsed, those organizations provide water, and they provide housing. They provide the infrastructure that people rely on. So Jonathan, I think that he saw the film as an opportunity to show that, a way of saying, look, yes, I'm charging these people. I myself am a migrant, and I am exploiting these migrants. But at the same time, he, I think, is saying, I'm getting them out of death. People die of malnutrition. People are fleeing genocide. People are fleeing so many different types of catastrophes, and he is the person that they rely on to get from point A to point B. So I think that he's a really complex guy, and he's another one that you got to let some distance build, but he's yeah, he was really fascinating to work with.
Yeah. Talk about some of the challenges, like logistically, like you're in there not knowing what's going to happen at any point. Sure.
So in that part of the world, again, because of the scale of control the cartel has, we weren't particularly scared. I mean, there were a handful of acute moments where we really felt fear. We were followed by a local with a machete who, we thought was going to try to abduct us or do whatever. We, probably the most dangerous actively thing that we did was the boats. Getting on those boats was crazy and a really uniquely dumb thing to do. But, in terms of logistics, it really does come down to prep, to your production. Like, what is your plan of attack? All right, so we couldn't go to Venezuela because Venezuela has the diplomatic relationship with the states that they do. Ecuador was in free fall and I was told by the military, just do not come here. It is unacceptable for you to come here. So I realized that I could go to Colombia. The story begins at that border with Venezuela. And so they have a robust film industry. It's small, but it's robust. So we put together a very, very small group of people who had contacts with cartel, and they just said that you need to come to an understanding within yourself that you have to interact with the cartel. You have to make them aware of exactly what you want to do. It's almost like pitching a studio.
Wow.
Truly, it's you tell them exactly what your plan is, exactly what you want to shoot. They will tell you how they will allow it to happen, and as long as you play by their rules, you will be okay. They do not want international journalists to be hurt, abducted, or robbed, and that's why Jonathan's colleague said that to Leo and the family. There were thieves in that region, and they were executed because anything that will be a tiny blip in that industry, it's so not worth whatever loss there might be, whatever heat there might be to the scale of value that industry has to them. So they told me not to feel fear, really. They said, we will make sure that you're okay. Just, this is how you can shoot it. I mean, I broke these rules, to be honest. To be very clear. I mean, they said, don't shoot any of our guys. Every time you saw somebody in a pink hoodie, they were cartel folks. But, did what we had to do.
To that, when you're filming Verite style, was there a point when you're shooting and something happened and you're like, it takes a left turn?
Maria's order for removal. There was absolutely no indication that was going to be an issue. Her situation was so murky at first that we all assumed that her asylum process had begun. And this is why this film is also really interesting to me now as a viewer. It's sort of a litigation of my own ignorance and blind spots. And what I hope it does for an audience is present you with at least a broad analysis of everything. So once you've watched the film, the handshake agreement that I do with you all is you're going to walk away with now a fairly comprehensive, at least, understanding of this process and how opaque and how bizarre and sort of just confusing and sort of maze-like it can be. So we had no idea that she had not submitted her asylum application. She didn't know that she had a time frame that she had to do it within. So she gets that letter thinking that it was going to be her asylum just miraculously appearing. Mike says, you haven't even started. You haven't even started this process, and they're now going to get you 24 hours from now, unless you can stop the clock right now with Don Pedro and that NGO, they will come for you. And so that was the first real left turn of that kind.
Oh my God. Again, just talking about her, that scene where she's by, Battery Park, right? Looking at the Statue of Liberty, that cinematography was so powerful. Watching that now, you mentioned the editing. Talk about working with Benjamin. How many hours did you have in total? And talk about cutting that down to the 2 hours.
An unhealthy amount. And if anybody here is a filmmaker, don't do what we did. We had 250 to 300 hours of footage. So go in a little more disciplined than we were. We were shooting concurrently with the edit for 2.5 to 3 years. So I would go shoot at E.B. Love's, and he lives in, the West Village. I would go from the East Village to the West Village, hand him cards. He would dump the cards, and it would just accumulate and accumulate. What that did, though, that I'm really proud of, is it gives the film a really alive feeling, because he would be cutting scenes that we shot 4 hours ago. So we would be able to steer it. I mean, to your previous question, we would steer the edit based on events that had just happened. So it's as close to how I experienced it as one can make it.
As far as, you know, how you capture the humanitarian crisis that is happening as we speak, you know, how much, like, news are you watching elsewhere, like documentaries, or spending time, like, out on the streets of New York as you're making it, telling the story to further help shape the story too?
Sure. So I look to a few films for guidance in terms of tone and sort of ways of interrogating a crisis. I think that, so I looked at Gianfranco Rossi's film Fire at Sea, was really, really useful. He, with not a lot of dialogue, does a really great job of visually plunging you into a crisis and making you really wholly understand it. So that was useful. I know Matt Heineman. We've connected. He gave me advice for my Ukraine film, so I looked at his film City of Ghosts. So I think the media was actually fairly helpful. But I was in the street constantly, and it's important to remember that this crisis was happening in real time around us, so you couldn't really escape it. I mean, New York was at the brink. We didn't have a mayor, candidly, who gave a damn about any element of it. He saw it as an opportunity to crony up and to get his friends paid. It's my bias speaking, but that is how it looked and felt and proved to be the case. So the city was fracturing around us, and these NGOs were stepping up. So every day something changed, something was alive, something was happening. And so it was very much the environment of the city.
Just to go back about, like, you know, this is out there, we can all learn from this about the crisis, about immigration, about trafficking, all of it. You know, what are you hoping that audiences take away, and also if there's like action that we can do as, you know, as a public as we watch this?
Yeah, so like I said, my goal is to present you with a document that once you've read this document, by the end of it, you will have at least a broader understanding of what this issue is. We hear so much in politics, and, you know, moving into election season and all this stuff, we hear about the immigration crisis and how there are these invaders, or on the flip side, how, you know, I mean, it's just such a toxic and complex political rhetoric. My goal is simply to have you all, as viewers, understand that these are human beings. And it's not, it doesn't need to, you know, it's these are people who experienced extraordinary trauma and pain, and they have fled their homes, not because they're looking to take jobs or to, you know, steal New Yorkers' homes or housing. It's because if they stay where they were, they would die. And that is the qualification of an international refugee, and that's why they're protected internationally. They flee Syria because ISIS will decapitate them on the internet. They flee these places, economic collapse, environmental disasters, because if they stay at home, there's a legitimate, reasonable fear of death. And so if the film lets you walk away with an understanding of them as people who have been through something, then it will have succeeded.
Yeah. Talking about the mayor, are you feeling hopeful with New York's?
I am, yeah, and I owe you a more of a response to the other question, because these are related. I feel a lot of hope. I think that, I mean, I voted for Zohran Mamdani. He's, I think, representative of what I hope with this film to achieve, which is an understanding that people will maybe start to understand and view people as human beings. I think that we need to hold him to a high standard, and that he's representative of our hopes. So we need to now elevate our own expectations of him. I think something that he did, which I really liked, is that he started as a food bank guy. He was a volunteer at the Astoria Food Bank. So he was like any of those people in the backgrounds of those shots at EV Loves. He was just one of those guys. And he had a really close relationship with Tyler at EV Loves, actually, Zohran did. And so I think that if there's anything that we can do, I think that one should try to do it. I think that if you have the bandwidth to volunteer to mutual aid, I think you should. I really recommend to people, man, learn a little bit of a language. Like this sounds like a meaningless thing, but when you're in a city that's completely collapsing around a refugee crisis, being able to speak a few words of Spanish or French to a Haitian family or to somebody from Venezuela who has no idea even what city they're in, who haven't had food in 72 hours or water in 24 hours, being able to say, "Hi, I hear you. 2 blocks to the right, there's a soup kitchen, and they will, you can go there." These tiny action phrases, you will be stunned at the immediate material impact that you have on their lives just by being able to have a tiny conversation. So yeah, I really recommend learning just a little bit of a language, French, Spanish, various other languages. Yeah. That's something.
Oh my God, incredible. I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about, but I think that's just the perfect takeaway for the audience tonight. And I want to thank you all so much for coming out. And thank you, Nathaniel, for that incredible insight into making Roads of Fire. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody.